some questions from the audience. One question was, how far can we go in detecting problems before users?
So one approach that we're using in our team is we're not only relying on monitoring itself, or like relying on what our users do, but we also have like an end-to-end testing project in place, or we're working on it. We've still ironing out some issues. And what we're going to do with that is it will actually perform the same operations on our production instance, so that we can have tests as well running against our production deployments, so that we can gather metrics, but then also see if we can find problems before our users do.
Okay. So the other question is, have you tried other monitoring platforms like New Relic, Azure Application Insights, and if yes, what are the differences between these and Prometheus?
So I have to confess, before this project that I joined, I had no experience of monitoring, and all my experiences with Prometheus, so I can't really comment on other platforms. I do have some friends who are very into this, so I get asked a lot, or I get asked to debate the difference between push and pull metrics. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people mention whenever talking about Prometheus. But other than that, I can't really comment. Sorry.
Okay. So one that it's on the news today, tomorrow, in the light of GDPR, which you may know is the General Data Protection Regulation that is coming up tomorrow. Did you find a need to change how much data you collect with Prometheus and how it's stored?
So the metrics that we're currently gathering about our services, we're not actually storing specific user data in our metrics. So things like we might have like recorded like user IDs and things like that, but if you've got too many labels and unique values, that can like cause an issue with Prometheus. It's a performance consideration. So typically we are trying not to do that. I think there might be some cases where we're gathering perhaps user emails, but it is something that we're aware of, and I think is already in place. Like we're trying to anonymize that data so that it's not included.
Okay. Is Prometheus also useful for services that are not in Kubernetes OpenShift?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it has support for service discovery. So if you're using different cloud computing platforms, so you can configure this to monitor like EC2 instances or Azure instances, and I think it's got lots of different options depending on how you're deploying your application.
Okay, and this is quite specific, so I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this. Can it be integrated as a backend for the Drop Wizard metrics framework?
I'm not the person to ask.
Google that.
Sorry.
Come on.
But I'm sure someone out there will know. So.
So that's it. Any other questions? Okay.
Hi. Does Prometheus has any kind of pattern detections to create alerts and strange trends in the metrics?
Sorry, so was the question, can it automatically detect anomalies and things?
Yep.
I don't think it does support that. As I said, like it might, to be honest, I don't actually know, but I think the general approach is that you configure the specific things that you want to check rather than getting it to adapt and try and figure out things about your system. At least that's my understanding. I might be wrong on that. Sorry, I don't know for sure.
There was a question around here. Yeah.
Thanks. In the demo we saw, you are sampling every 15 seconds.
Yes.
Are there techniques to reduce the sample size over time? Because I'm a little bit concerned about the amount of data collected over time. thinking in years?
Yeah, so I think typically Prometheus isn't really designed to be used as a long-term storage. It's usually you just want it for relatively recent metrics. So to be honest, so the Prometheus instances that we use within Bitnami are managed by our SRE team. So I don't actually know if they've got skills we've actually got like our SRE manager here, but I'm not going to call on her. And yes, I don't know specifically if there are ways to do that, but I think in general it's not really designed to be long-term storage.
You know which data engine is in the back end of the Prometheus server?
I think it's like so they've got their own time series database that they're storing for, that has been developed for the project.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
What about security, authentication? There was a question about data protection and so on.
So do you mean security? At what point do you mean for Prometheus scraping from your?
Securing the access to the metrics. What happens with sensitive data that may be within the metrics, like user?
Yeah. So what you
details.
can do, you can configure the targets that you're scraping to have. You can introduce authentication there and configure that. So if you do need to provide so if your services which are exporting metrics. Or perhaps like private, you can configure authentication there.
Regarding the data itself, can be encrypted while within Prometheus internal database, or?
I'm not actually sure. So our approach internally is that we just don't make any of the data public. It's all kind of what's saying behind like a VPN and things like that. That's how we access it. So it's not publicly accessible. So that might be an approach that you want to use. Or I don't know, maybe you can actually configure Prometheus itself or other consumers of that data to have authentication. So for example, if you're using like Grafana or something like that, rather than the Prometheus UI directly, you can, I know that it has support for user accounts and so on. So you can authenticate with consumers of this of the data.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
One more question.
Considering the push versus pull situation, so if for instance, one is that when you query the services, there's a risk that services will be, slow, and another situation is that those changes they will pile up while Prometheus is probably down. How to manage such situations?
Sorry, so I think, so your question, so if the service is slow and not responding, and then also cases where Prometheus has actually gone down. So I think for like services that are slow, I think a lot of the metrics, the way that they're designed is that they can adapt to gaps in the data. So you can use like other functions to try and smooth that out potentially. As for like Prometheus being down and Prometheus being down, I'm not actually sure how to best deal with those situations. But I'm sure other people have like other strategies. So I think you can run it in you can run multiple instances of Prometheus, which target the same instances, and then you'll have duplication in the data, but whenever, for example, you've got alerts that are configured, the alert manager can do deduplication at that level, so you can run multiple instances to provide high availability there.
I mean, it can end up in a situation that all applications will be dead just because of Prometheus is dead, because the memory will be, out of memory exception because of metrics piling up, and or we need to manage this from application side. Like,
So
have to delete the.
So
all this?
whenever the metrics are collected by Prometheus, they're not like reset within the client or within the application itself. It's kind of the way you can imagine is that at each point, the application is just presenting like a snapshot of its current metric state. So they don't necessarily need to be cleared out or as such. And then sometimes as well, you know, the metrics can also be cleared out whenever like a service restarts, but Prometheus is designed to deal with that. So it's like, for example, it's counters, which are always increasing. If that drops to 0 for a particular value, it assumes that the service restarts and kind of shifts the data up so that it can carry on from that point. So it's not something I've been aware of in terms of like it being a performance issue on the client, or sorry, on your service side, Prometheus being down.
So we run out of time, but Bridget will be around the conference. So
Yes, please come and speak to me.
thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
So we have now the lunch break, and